Other news worth your attention at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump said yesterday that he and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, had agreed, during a phone call conversation that Washington and Moscow will immediately engage in direct negotiations aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. Now, after talking to Putin, Trump also said he had a conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky said that he had discussed ways to bring peace to Ukraine with Trump. The Ukrainian leader noted that Trump shared details of his conversations with Putin. Zelensky also adding that he and Trump agreed to stay in contact around future meeting plans. Let's try and make sense of all of this for you. Bring in SABC News correspondent Stuart Smith, live to us from Kyiv in Ukraine. And in fact, Stuart, of course, this is a lot of information that's developed over the last 24 hours as we watch messages from at least two of the presidents so far. Let me just get a sense from you how this is landing in Kyiv, especially because there seems to be a whole lot more of an appetite, at the very least, to begin talks.
Yeah, well, President Zelensky's message after he spoke with President Trump, who had just spoken with President Putin, was very measured in its response. It was talking about having a meaningful call with President Trump, and that President Trump shared details of his conversation with President Putin. Ukraine is trying desperately to keep the United States invested and interested in Ukrainian security. But frankly, that call and also the comments by Pete Hegseth, the new US Defense Secretary, have not landed well here in Kyiv. There's a sense amongst the officials in Ukraine that this is the United States stepping away from guaranteeing Ukrainian security. Some specific comments to that effect that have spooked Kyiv is that, for a start, Ukraine will not be able to join NATO. Specifically, the Defense Secretary said it was unrealistic, which is a big change in tone from last year when NATO agreed, including the US, that there would be an irreversible path to NATO membership for Ukraine. The other concerning statement was that the US Defense Secretary said that it was also unrealistic for Ukraine to expect to get back all of its territories since before 2014. So that includes Crimea, the peninsula in southern Ukraine annexed by Russia then, and also the 4 new territories annexed by Russia since 2022. Now, to an extent, that was underneath the expectation that if there is NATO membership for Ukraine, it would be many years away, and also that Ukraine wouldn't be able to get back all of those annexed territories. But Ukraine's fear is that by saying that out loud before negotiations have even started, the United States is starting to give ground towards the Russian sense of how they should end before those peace talks have even begun.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost feels like Ukraine is entering these talks being forced to make several very important concessions.
Yeah, so it's for the first time a major point, in the first time in years, that actually there is any realistic talk of negotiations. President Trump calling President Putin, saying for 1 hour and a half, and then a 1 hour phone call with President Zelensky. So for the potential for negotiations to begin, this is a very good sign. The fear in Ukraine is that President Trump's priority seems to be creating peace talks and ending the war as soon as possible. He's spoken about speedy negotiations, ending the bloodshed as soon as possible. Ukraine fears that an emphasis on speed over a just peace or a sustainable long-term peace may put it into a very difficult position, effectively forcing it to concede on issues it doesn't want to. From Moscow's perspective, this is progress. The Kremlin has welcomed Trump's approaches and also says that it is also looking at a meeting with President Trump. He's suggested that that could take place in Saudi Arabia, which has been involved in prisoner exchanges between Russia and Ukraine, and President Trump has a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, so that is something that could happen. All of that to say, though, that Ukraine is starting to feel, officials suggest, slightly sidelined by the process, and that's a concern shared by European capitals too, who have long insisted there should be no talks about Ukraine unless they're with Ukraine. But from President Trump's and President Putin's phone call on Wednesday, it seems that that is not always exactly how this is going.
Yeah. In the backdrop, of course, we're told that the incursion is continuing on the ground, so to speak. In fact, Zelensky being quoted as saying that this continuing invasion from Russia makes it difficult to even hold a possible new presidential election in the country.
Yeah, it's been a complaint of the new United States administration that President Zelensky has not held elections. Ukrainian law forbids elections taking place under martial law, and there's also a strong fear in Ukraine that if they were to try to hold elections now, it would be an open invitation for Russian political interference. One of the big concerns about this war in general is the fact that even if Russia does not manage to take more territory, any destabilizing influence in Ukraine could lead to its collapse regardless. And so elections are something that Ukrainian politicians say is not something that can happen now, but Zelensky has said that once martial law is lifted and the war is over, he would be open to having presidential elections. They were meant to happen last year according to the regular election timetable, but of course that was not possible at the time. In terms of what Zelensky has said in terms of other areas that peace negotiations could go, he suggested that the Russian Kursk region that Ukrainian troops incurred into last year could be one chip that Ukraine has, trading perhaps return of the Kursk region to Russia for one of Ukraine's territories. Another thing Zelensky is trying to do is try and keep the US interested in Ukraine's security by suggesting it can have preferential access or some other prioritized way to get to Ukrainian minerals and help regain some of the money it's spent on arming Ukraine that way. Ukraine looking at all options to try and keep the US involved and also to find a just peace, but it looks like the negotiations could be running on way ahead of what President Zelensky would like to happen at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So much at stake, so many moving parts. Stuart Smith, thanks for helping us connect the dots. Stuart is our correspondent live to us there from Kyiv in Ukraine.